Welcome back everybody to the VO2 Lounge podcast, your one-stop shop for all things health and fitness. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about VO2 max. By the end of today's episode, you'll have a better understanding of what VO2 max is, how it's measured, why it's so important for more than just athletic performance, and then how you can improve it. I must say, before we get onto any of this, that anything said in this podcast does not substitute the advice of a medical professional. Listeners are always advised to seek professional medical advice before acting upon anything learned during these episodes. Now, with that done, let's get on to the information. So what is VO2 max? An important place to start. There's no point talking about something without actually understanding what it is fundamentally. It is put on the internet in various different places in various different formats, but fundamentally VO2 max is the maximum volume of oxygen that a person can use during exercise. This can be expressed in two different ways. The one way is absolute. This is expressed in litres per minute, and then more usefully for comparison between individuals you have relative VO2 max. This is expressed in millilitres per minute per kilogram. An easy way to sort of identify these two different measurements is one would simply be a smaller number. If you hear someone has a VO2 max of 3, for example, that is an absolute value. Whereas if you hear someone has a VO2 max of 60 or 50, that is a relative value. This is useful because two athletes may have differing absolute VO2 maxes. One may have one of 5 and the other may have one of 6. But for a sport such as cycling or running, where the power to weight ratio is critical in the performance of the sport, it is easier to differentiate between athletes by introducing their weight into things. So that's why relative VO2 max is usually the value kind of put forward when you're talking about elite athletes. It's not the entire picture when it comes to athletic performance, because your ability to operate at a high level of this VO2 max, say 80 or 90% of your VO2 max for extended periods of time over an hour, is arguably to some degree more important than the final the actual value itself. So now you just have a definition of it is being the maximum volume of oxygen that a person can uptake during exercise. Now you're probably wondering, what is it? How do you measure this value? So typically VO2 max tests are conducted in a medical facility like a laboratory or a hospital. They're usually conducted by doctors or cardiologists or some kind of specialist within the fitness industry. In sort of an athletic and clinical setting, sometimes VO2 max is estimated. The estimations use protocols like cycling protocols, walking protocols, treadmill protocols, and things like that. They might have someone doing this indoors or outdoors. But another method used to estimate is things like the Cooper run. This is a 12-minute run where your final value will give you an estimate of your VO2 max in mil per kg per min. If you're doing this in kilometers, VO2 max will equal 22.351 times the numbers of kilometers ran minus 11.288, and for people working in miles it would be 35.97 times the number of miles ran minus 11.29. So if you're not looking to make an estimate, or for example, especially if you're trying to use something like the Cooper run and you're a cyclist, well, it's not optimal. You're not using the sport you're actually looking to measure yourself in. So in a laboratory or a kind of hospital setting, you will either be on a treadmill or a bike or a rowing machine, something that can be easily controlled and is indoors and static. This is not done outdoors. The protocol will be the resistance or the treadmill speed, or you will effectively have to put more effort in periodically in steps. So maybe say you're a cyclist, maybe it's riding at 200 watts, then 220, 240, 260. If you're running, maybe it's 7-minute kilometer, 6 80-minute, 6 20-minute, and slowly getting faster and faster. Now, where the oxygen is measured here is you will be wearing a mask that has a one-way valve in it. Now, when you inhale, oxygen from the surrounding atmosphere will come through the mask and to your lungs, and you'll process that oxygen. We know to a fairly reasonable level of accuracy what the oxygen content in the atmosphere is of 21% at sea level, and then this can be adjusted if you're not doing this at sea level. This value then provides you for your datum of how much oxygen is available. This goes into your lungs, the process goes through. You then exhale, and this one-way valve shuts, and this gas now has to go through a machine that can measure the final oxygen content in that air that you've exhaled. At this point, you continue to exercise until a point you can no longer exercise, and the machine will tell you, or the clinician or whoever it is, the operator, what your maximum amount of oxygen utilization is, and then it's simply calculated into your VO2 max. So how many liters of oxygen are you able to consume per minute, and then that can be converted into how many milliliters you can consume per minute per kilogram of body weight. So that would be the gold standard, and then things like the Cooper run would follow afterwards. There's some submaximal tests like resting heart rate, 1 mile walk time, 6 mile walk distance, but these again even less accurate because the fact that they're submaximal, and there's a lot more estimation put into this. For reference, if anyone has already got their VO2 max and has come away with it wondering what the hell is this in the first place, and they're here to figure that out and would like kind of a broad range of values, a very broad range of people 18 to 45 years of age. An active male would have a VO2 max of about 42.5 to 46.4 mil per kg per min, and a female would have one of about 33 to 36.9. Now this is across a very broad age range, so to give you some perspective on how this declines, well, the average VO2 max scores for men by age 20 to 24 is 44 to 50 mil per kg per min, whereas at the age of 50 to 54 that has dropped to 33 to 36 mil per kg per min. So you can see how that is dropping off reasonably quickly. We'll go into a better detail as to how much that is shortly. So you've now got values. Maybe you've got your own VO2 max in front of you. You've now compared it to the average people, in your age range and your sex. But you're wondering, what does this relate to? What do any of these mean? What can I compare these to in general activities? Well, walking at 2.5 miles an hour, which is considered a brisk walk, requires about 10 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight. As a comparison, your body uses about 40 to 50% of that value when at rest, so 5 or 4 mil per kg per min. And then when you up those speeds to about 5 miles an hour, which is a 12-minute mile or a 7:30-minute kilometer, both running and walking require about 30 mil of oxygen per kilogram per minute. So that kind of gives you the perspective. If you've gone and done one and you've got a VO2 max of 30, then it probably explains why you're running at a 7:30-minute kilometer and it feels like you're going all out. So there you have a value. So if you're someone running 5-minute kilometers pretty easily, then it's safe to say your VO2 max is considerably higher than 30 mil. So maybe you have got one, maybe you haven't got one, maybe you haven't been convinced yet to go and get a VO2 max test. Maybe you're thinking, that's great, a 7-minute kilometer run, but I hate running, I don't cycle, I maybe play a bit of football or rugby or cricket or some other kind of sport. But why is this important? Well, it's obvious why it's important for athletes, because if you're doing any kind of endurance sport, whether that's cycling, running, a short sport like a 400 meter track runner, you those kind of sports, you're like, obviously you need oxygen to do that sport, so having this higher oxygen capacity is incredibly important. But it's also important for other sports like football or rugby, sports where you are still moving around the field and still need oxygen to carry out those sports. But moving away from sport and looking more at the effect it has on your day-to-day life, well, if we look at that brisk walk of 10 mil per kg per min, well then you may be thinking, well, I've got a VO2 max of like 35 and I'm 25. Well, this is where you have to start paying closer attention. After the age of about 25 in men and women, VO2 max tends to decline at a rate of between 10 and 7%. In highly trained individuals, well, that can be pushed out to about 30, but you are still going to see this decline. Yes, you may come from a higher ceiling, but you will see this decline. So this is why it's so important to have the highest VO2 max you can possibly achieve at any point in your life. VO2 max relates very closely to the quality of life that you'll have as you age and your life expectancy in general. It may seem like you don't need it now, but think maybe when you're retired or you're in your 70s. If you had a VO2 max of 30 when you were 25, well, let's say you go from 25 to 35, that now is dropped. Say it was originally 40, that's now dropped to 36. Then when you hit 45, that is now 32? My maths is going all over the place, so let's just say it's 32. And then you're now sub 30 when you hit 55. Well, you can no longer do a 7 minute per kilometre, but you're thinking, oh, that's great. But then by the time you hit 75, that brisk walk is starting to prove challenging because it's very high up in your VO2 max capacity. And you may not be able to operate at that VO2 max for very long. So even operating sub-maximally is a big challenge. So regular exercise that improves the lungs, heart and skeletal muscle will improve VO2 max and are going to pay dividends later in life when you just need that oxygen carrying capacity for general tasks. So you may now be thinking, actually, I don't want to be an elite athlete, but I could do with being able to pick up grandchildren from school and walk them home. I could do with being able to walk to the shops myself and bring back shopping. I could do with being able to go for long walks, maybe even jog occasionally or get on the exercise. But I could just do with life not being a task and being able to go about it to my best capability. Well, that's good because it's something that, although not easy to improve, and by no means is it something that you can just simply, sit on the sofa and improve it, but it is something that can be improved. The big factor is the fact that the top 5% of people per age range of VO2 max have a 5 times reduction in all-cause mortality as a result of their improved VO2 max. And that is a pretty big value. But you're also thinking that's a pretty high percentile of people. Well, by just going from sedentary to average, you get the 3x reduction. So now let's focus on how do you just get to that average point? Well, it's going to require a mixture of things. You're going to need both low intensity and high intensity exercise. The low intensity is almost giving you the right to do the high intensity work. It's building the infrastructure needed to perform that high intensity work and giving you the work capacity to carry out that high intensity work. So that's exercise that's in the range of 60% of your maximum, and then the high intensity work is things that are 85% and over of your VO2 max. Those are really going to stress the system, and there you're going to see these big gains. But then don't be fooled that doing more of this 85% region is going to result in better results. No, it's a careful balance of maybe 4 days a week just doing really what is quite easy exercise at 60%. Maybe it's not originally because just doing exercise is hard, but it will eventually seem like quite an easy task, and then moving on to this 85% exercise, 85% of your maximum. That's where you're then going to see yourself really pushing that value up. So another little bit of information is that with this training and with this improved VO2 max, it's been said that a well-trained 70-year-old can exhibit a sort of biological age of an untrained 50-year-old. This is basically just looking at VO2 max, so you can quite easily see someone who's untrained at the age of 50 with a VO2 max of someone who is 70 and has, been adequately trained during their life. Your ultimate VO2 max is there is a high level of heritability in that. About 72% to 43%. It's quite a big range, but it's just saying that quite a lot of it is. But for most of us, what our absolute maximum VO2 max is really of no concern. We really are not going to be pushing the needle enough to ever find out what our maximum VO2 max is. So just by exercising in a kind of endurance manner 4 times a week could see a drastic improvement in your quality of life as you age. So what have we learned here? Well, VO2 max is the maximum oxygen uptake in mil per kg per min, or litres per kilogram if you're looking at relative, and mil per kg per min is absolute. It can be measured in a laboratory, or it can also be gauged or estimated by things like the Cooper run. As we said, it's a high predictor of your quality of life due to things like cardiovascular disease, and that can also result in reduction in your mortality. It's going to decrease by about 10% per decade after the age of 25 if you're a sort of averagely trained individual, and about 30 if you're a really high performance athlete. A mixture of low intensity and high intensity is important to improve this. There's things like the 80-20 principle, but really if you're looking to just do this as a all-round health improvement, then worrying about the exact distribution isn't important. And if maybe 1 week you're just feeling really good and you do 2 days where you do high intensity, well, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to hurt you. But don't go do balls to the wall every single day. Try to have a nice balance, and get out there more days than you're not. And, make sure that some of those days are hard, but a lot of those days it's just enjoyable. And it's just, if you're riding, just riding around easily. If you're running, just running around easily, not suffering, for lack of a better word. So, as always, if you enjoyed this episode, why not follow, rate, or share the podcast from wherever you get it? It helps other people find it. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.